Would you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, God. Amen. This is John Daniel Sakamoto. John was my nephew until he died from a tragic accident at the age of 26 a couple years ago. He was a wonderful soul, an incredible life of the party, funniest kid you ever met. When he was a little kid, he could just bust up the room just with the way he could move. He would come in and do some dance, and we would just be hysterically laughing. Incredibly wonderful human being. When he was in high school, he started to have some trouble with substances, and so his parents sent him from Hawaii to come live for the summer with my family up in Oregon at the time. And so we got him a job and we got him set up. And then my friend who had gotten him the job called me one day and said, so we got a problem because we drug test all of our employees and he tested positive for substances. So we let his parents know, and his parents said, well, what are we going to do? And they found a wilderness program for dealing with substance stuff. So my job one morning was to get him up early in the morning and say, hey, JD, let's get in the car. And he said, well, what are we doing? I said, let's just go for a ride. And then once we got past all the places where he could have hopped out of the car, then I told him, yeah, here's where we're going. We're going to this place where you're going to stay for the next 3 months. And you're going to be in a wilderness program. And no, you can't bring anything. And he was not so happy with me. But he went out there into the wilderness. And in the wilderness, he had daily group therapy. He had daily individual sessions with some of the counselors that were there. He had to survive in the wild with this group of people, and so they had to make shelters. They had to build their own fires. They had to figure out how to get by and how to work, do teamwork, and it absolutely changed him. He came back, he looked different. He looked stronger. He was off substances, and he did not have a relapse until he died later on, many years later. And I remember the most amazing part was he wanted to show me how he figured out how to make fire from flint. You know, when you just rub flint on steel. He knew how to do this now, and so he got some sticks together and a couple little, and he shaved off some little teeny shavings, and it took him a little while to get it, but then he eventually was able to show me, and I thought to myself, that's who you are, man. That's who you are. You're the guy that can make fire now out of nothing. He came back to himself. He returned again to the land of his soul. That was the purpose of that time. To when we wander off, to sometimes have people and structures that call us back. I think that remembering who we are is the essential part of Lent. Not just who we are, but to whom we belong. We belong to God first and foremost. We also belong to each other. We have relationships that matter. And if we don't tend those relationships, we find ourselves adrift, and that is the core, I think, of a lot of our temptations and challenges in life. So, big Bible study moment, stuff they teach you in seminary. Today's text, Luke 4, comes right after Luke 3. It's true. Look it up. Go ahead. They're just pew Bibles. You can check that out right now. And in Luke 3, the last thing that happens is Jesus goes out to the Jordan, and John baptizes him. And when he comes up out of the water, he hears these words, "You are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." Those words, "You are my son, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased," are echoing in his ears because it says right then that the Spirit drove him into this wilderness. He needed to have his outward bound experience to process. What does it mean to be God's beloved child? What does it mean for my purpose in my life? How can I let those words reverberate in me? You know they're important because in the temptations, Look what the devil says first. If you are God's son, command these stones to become bread. Right? If you are God's son, throw yourself down from the pinnacle of the temple, and God will surely rescue you. In other words, what the devil is calling into question, and I don't mean the horned devil, I mean what all those forces that are not coming from God in the world call into question for us, is, are you really a daughter of God? Are you really God's son, or is that just something that you hear in church? Are you really, honestly and truly, divine in your nature? Or are you just some schmuck? Are you just a number? Are you a target audience? Are you a demographic? Are you a label? Are you all the other things that we do to reduce ourselves from our true identity as God's children? I think that those conflicting stories are really important for us to be wrestling with, and especially in this time of Lent, to come out on the side of the promises of God over the lies of the world. The lie of the world says you only matter by what your bank account has, the car you drive, the body shape you have, the way you look, your sexual orientation, marital status, race, color, creed, all those sort of things. Those are the things that really matter. And that's all a big, hairy lie. The truth is, you are and I am God's beloved child. And I think that the root of all temptation is that we don't really matter to God. When we start to believe that, then we're susceptible to everything. We're susceptible to addictions, to be drawn into things that'll give momentary flushes of positive feeling. They'll get that little dopamine hit that happens when we, whatever it is that we do, because what we don't have is that deep, deep inner peace, the peace that only God can give, that says, I am solidly God's beloved child. So the question that we have to ask ourselves from the moment we get up and then all day and maybe even into our dreaming is, do I really matter? Do I matter to God? I mean, and I'm starting here with the first person. Well, it needs to go out from there. But we have to sort of wrestle with that. And that may be a bigger wrestling match than we know. It may require us dealing with stories that we were told from our parents or from other teachers or people about our value. That maybe someone along the way told you that you were less than all the beauty that you are. That maybe you didn't matter in some way. But the truth of the gospel, if you get nothing else from all the times that you ever come to church and any message you possibly hear, please hear this. You matter to God. You matter deeply and personally. If you were the only one, God would have done absolutely everything that God has done, including the cross of Calvary, just for you. Do you believe that? Because if you don't, then the winds of whatever Madison Avenue sends are going to work on us. The lure of whatever intoxicant there is will come to us. And we will find ourselves drifting into places that we don't want to be. And we have to return again, then, to the land of our soul. I think that a lot of us grow up with the sense that we are unlovable, or that we're partially lovable, or that we're lovable if we're performing well, and getting good grades, and being with the right people, and doing all these things to sort of check off the box so I can make myself more lovable. But the scriptures are saying you are, in your very being, already loved. Not just lovable, but fully loved. So the focus of Lent is to do this. You go to the wilderness. The wilderness can be a silent meditation place for you. It can be, for me, out in the ocean. You go to a place where the distractions go away, and you can just focus. Keep your focus and listen again for God's word to you. This happens oftentimes in these lonely places, in these wilderness places, as it happened for Jesus. It happened for Jacob in this same way. This painting is of Jacob wrestling along the shores of the river Jabbok. And I love this painting for so many reasons. First of all, I love that the feet, whatever it is that Jacob is wrestling with doesn't really have a face. It's got one hand that's gripping onto his ankle, and it's going to be causing him the injury of that hip that he will walk away with for the rest of his life. But the other hand is almost in a hand of blessing. And you see Jacob, he's in this space that looks almost like complete surrender to this being. He wrestled with this being. He wrestled with himself. He wrestled with his past. And he heard this new word. He said, "Bless me. I will not let you go until you bless me." And then this being said, "What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Jacob." And by the way, Jacob means scoundrel, tripper, con man. And that's what he has done so far. He has conned his way through his whole life. He's tricked and figured out how to connive his way. And he says, "You're no longer Jacob, but you are now Israel, the one who wrestles with God." So that wrestling is meant for our blessing. That inner struggle of, am I lovable? That time we spend, whether it's in a therapist's chair or with good friends or in our own meditation, to say, am I, just as I am, okay? And then to hear those words of, yes, you are, that is the blessing. And it allows us to reclaim our name, just as Jesus did. Jesus goes from baptism to wilderness to ministry. We go to these lonely places so that we can get back in touch with our baptismal promises that we matter to God. And then, now we're ready. If you matter to God, so does everybody else. Everybody else matters to God too, in the same way. Once you are whole, you are ready to share that wholeness with the people who don't see themselves as lovable. People who we go out to the margins of the world so that we can be changed by those on the margin. We can bring this love solid place that we have in our own hearts, but then let their experience change us and shape us. Not because we're more special than they are. In fact, because it's in that space that God can allow us to be changed into something new and something different. Father Greg Boyle, he had this, I was listening to a podcast with him the other day, and he said this, that just powerful to me. God does not protect me from anything, but God sustains me in everything. If you think about that, God doesn't necessarily take pain out of our lives. God doesn't remove us from the consequences of our actions. But God will sustain us in absolutely every place, including, and that's where you discover this, in the wilderness places. When we're out and lonely by ourselves, that's where we discover who we truly are. Our wholeness can be restored to us when we surrender to our true identity. We are, in fact, God's beloved children. And so are everybody else. So, we come back to our mission of this congregation and our personal missions, to share and experience God's unconditional love, and then to go tell that love and share that love with a world that desperately needs it, a world that constantly wants to divide into the good and the bad, the lovable and the unlovable. And we declare we are ourselves, whole and complete, because of God's unmerited love. Amen.